Welcome back to our Music History Podcast. This is episode 20. In our last episode, we started looking at the early Baroque period. We talked about the transition from the Renaissance period to the Baroque period. We talked about how in some ways the music became more extravagant and in other ways it became more controlled. We looked at a motet by Giovanni Gabrieli called O Magnum Mysterium, and we discussed the styles and features of the early Baroque. And today, as I mentioned last time, we're going to start talking about opera. And a lot of these points will come out as we talk about opera, but you may be wondering, why is opera so important? You know, it's this old thing, this dead thing that maybe my grandparents listened to, but I'm really not into. And, well, Mr. McLeod, he's gone to school for opera, so maybe that's why we have to learn about opera. No. Opera held a very special place in the world of Western traditional music because it didn't just use aspects of music, it drew from the entire artistic world. Of course, there was instrumental music, the orchestra that's playing. There's vocal music, both as soloists and as ensembles. There's acting. There's dance. There's art and art design when you think about the stage. There was also technology, because as much as you might not think it, in the years sort of 1600 to 1750, they lit the stage. And how did they go about doing that? That was through the modern technology at the time. So opera was this extremely important art form that existed in Europe. So knowing that, let's start to talk about it a little bit. Opera, or drama presented in music, with the characters singing instead of speaking, is often called the most characteristic art form of the Baroque period. For Baroque opera combined many different arts, not only music, drama, and poetry, but also dancing, highly elaborate set designs, and spectacular special effects. Incredibly ingenious machines were contrived to portray gods descending to earth, shipwrecks, volcanoes, and all kinds of natural and supernatural phenomenon. Scene designers often received top billing ahead of the composers. The early Florentine operas were court entertainments put on to celebrate royal weddings and the like. But the important step was taken in 1637 with the opening of the first public opera theater. First in Venice, and then in the whole of Italy, opera soon became the leading form of entertainment, almost like movies. By the end of the century, 7 opera houses in Venice fulfilled much the same function as movie theaters in a comparable modern city, say of around 145,000 people. Opera was a perfect answer to the general desire in the early Baroque era for individual emotionalism. For opera provided a stage on which the single individual could step forward to express his or her feelings in the most direct and powerful fashion. Indeed, composers felt a need to relieve the constant emotional pressure exerted on their characters by the ever-changing dramatic action. They had to contrive moments of relaxation, moments when the characters could stop and reflect. This led to a standard dualism that has been with opera ever since. Two things that we refer to as recitative and aria. This dualism between tension and response reflects that other Baroque dualism between freedom and strictness, extravagance and control. So let's talk about recitative first. Recitative comes from the Italian word for recitation, or to recite. It is a technique of declaiming words musically in a heightened theatrical manner. The singing voice closely follows the free rhythm of highly emotional speech. It mirrors and exaggerates the natural ups and downs that occur as an actor raises his or her voice at a question, lowers it in an aside, or cries out in distress. The accompaniment is usually kept to a minimum so that the singer/actor can interpret the dialogue or the action as spontaneously as possible, and so that all the words can be heard clearly. Recitative, the free side of the operatic dualism, is used for plot action, dialogue, and other situations in the drama where it is particularly important for the words to be brought out. On the other hand, where spoken drama would call for soliloquies and meditation, opera uses arias. So another way of thinking about recitative is recitative advances the plot. You know, if you see a movie, there's going to be set times in that movie where there's moments of emotion, whether it be a drama or whether it be an action movie. There's moments of emotion, and then there's time where you're trying to get from moment of emotion to moment of emotion. These recitatives allow us to move from moment to moment because they're essentially dialogue and allow the observer to know what the characters are thinking and how they're getting from place to place. But those moments of emotion, whether they be passionate love or explosions in a movie, those are expressed through aria. An aria is an extended piece for solo singer that has much more musical elaboration and coherence than a passage of recitative. The vocal part is more melodic, the rhythm is more consistent, and typically the accompaniment includes the entire orchestra. Here, the singer/actor mulls over his or her feelings at some leisure, instead of reacting moment by moment, as in recitative. Emotion is controlled and frozen into a tableau. Paradoxically, when the music gets more elaborate, the emotion stands still. Recitative required great singing actors, and arias required artists who could convert the notes of a score into the tableaus of brilliant, furious, sensuous, or tragic expression. Opera houses in the 17th century became showcases of vocal virtuosity, as they still are today. Ever since the Baroque era, musical drama and vocal display have vied with one another as the driving force of opera. So we're going to look at the composer Claudio Monteverdi, who lived from 1567 to 1643, and more specifically at his work called The Coronation of Poppaea, and we'll hear a brief example from there. One figure stood out above all others in music around 1600, just as Josquin des Prés had around 1500. Claudio Monteverdi, an enormously imaginative and innovative composer, also has the dubious distinction of being the first great composer whose music was attacked publicly for being too radical. Radical it was. Monteverdi had aptly been called the last great madrigalist and the first great opera composer. And indeed, while his earliest madrigals are close enough in style to those of Thomas Weelkes, some of his later ones are more like small opera scenes. Monteverdi first worked at the music-loving court of Mantua in northern Italy. There he wrote his first stage work, Orfeo, in 1607, famous in music history as the first masterpiece of opera. He then appointed choirmaster of St. Mark's Cathedral in Venice, the most prestigious musical position in all of Europe. At the end of his life, in the 1640s, he helped inaugurate public opera, Venice's greatest contribution to the history of music. So besides Orfeo in 1607, he wrote many other operas, including The Coronation of Poppaea in 1642. So after his first opera, Orfeo, none of Monteverdi's operas were printed, and some have been completely lost. A grievous loss indeed. All we have left of Arianna is the heroine's big lament, one of the greatest hits of the day, which Monteverdi published by itself in several different arrangements. Fortunately, two late masterpieces have survived: The Return of Ulysses and The Coronation of Poppaea. After slumbering for 300 years, Poppaea has recently proved to be a sleeper in opera houses around the world. So let's talk a little bit about a background. So even today, the story of the Coronation of Poppaea can shock by its startling and cynical dramatic realism. Poppaea, mistress to the notorious Roman Emperor Nero, schemes to get his wife, Ottavia, deposed and eminent advisor, Seneca, put to death. In a counterplot, Ottavia blackmails Ottone, Poppaea's rejected lover, into an attempt on Poppaea's life. He tries but fails. The counterplotters are all exiled. As an added cynical touch, Poppaea's ruthless maneuvering to be the crowned empress of Rome is shown to be aided by the god of love and the goddess of fortune. After a prologue sung by the mythological characters, Act 1 begins with Ottone arriving at Poppaea's house at daybreak and retreating in dismay after he sees Nero's guards outside of it. In an ironic alba, the guards curse military life and exchange scurrilous gossip about Poppaea's scheming. This is a vivid prelude to the first of the opera's several steamy love scenes. So, in the recitative, you will see Nero and Poppaea enter, who tries to wheedle Nero into staying with her. Delaying his departure as long as possible, she makes him promise to return. Accompanied by a lute as the continuo instrument, a voluptuous sound in this context, she repeats the question, "Tornerai?" or "Won't you return?" in increasingly seductive accents until Nero stops evading the issue and agrees. "Tornerò, yes, I will return." Notice how the vocal line does not form itself into real melodies, but goes up or down or speeds or slows, following the words in speech-like fragments. Nero's most extended evasion is a short aria-like fragment called an arioso. Then the recitative resumes on the final adios, some of them melting, others breathless. The singers improvise delicate vocal ornamentations. Then comes the aria. As soon as Nero leaves, Poppaea shows her true colors in a jubilant aria. It is accompanied by a small orchestra and contains 3 short sections. The first is a little dance of triumph, an orchestral tune played by strings from recorder, to which Poppaea sings her first two lines of text. Speranza tu mi vai il core accarezzando. After a moment of uncertainty, marked by a momentary lapse into recitative, her mood becomes harder and more determined in the aria's second section. Finally, in section 3, she sings light-hearted, fast military fanfares. This is word painting in the madrigal tradition, as she rejoices in the fact that the gods are fighting on her behalf. Mercurial, manipulative, fearless, dangerously sensual, Poppaea has been characterized unforgettably as Monteverdi's music in this scene. So please enjoy this excerpt from the Coronation of Poppaea.
Se ben io vo, pur teco io sto, tornerai. Il cor dalle tue stelle mai non si discende. La unità dal punto, se non si smembra la unità dal punto. Tornerai? Tornerò. Quando? Ben tosto. Tosto, mi prometti? Te giuro. E me lo servirai? E se a te non verrò, tu a me verrai. E me lo servirai? E se a te non verrò, tu a me verrai.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Come back next episode where we're going to look at an example from another opera, from another big-time opera composer of this period, and that is Henry Purcell and the opera Dido and Aeneas. After looking at that, we're going to start to look at instrumental music during this time period as well. So we hope to see you back next time. Cheers.